Mara Ellison moved into Briar Glen because it looked like a place where nothing dramatic ever happened. There were no security gates, no fountains, no stone lions guarding the entrance, just tidy lawns and mailboxes lined up like polite teeth. She wanted boring more than she wanted beautiful. After the divorce, boring felt like safety. Her townhouse was small, sunlit, and close enough to her job at the county clinic that she could bike on days her old sedan refused to start. The HOA paperwork had been thick, but it was all the usual language about paint colors, trash bins, and quiet hours. Mara signed where she was told to sign, paid the dues, and tried to believe she was buying peace. For 8 months, she got it. Then, on a Monday morning that smelled like wet asphalt, a bright orange notice was taped to her front door. Violation, unapproved exterior modification. Fine, $100 per day until cured. Mara read it twice, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something rational. She looked up at her front porch like it might confess to an illegal renovation. All she saw were her potted basil and the doormat that said hello in peeling letters. The notice cited a section of the covenants she did not remember, something about exterior appearance and uniformity. At the bottom, it demanded immediate removal of the modification and threatened liens, collections, and attorney fees. You know that moment when a small piece of paper makes your stomach drop as if you are in an elevator, and you can already hear the future costs adding up in your head. It was that kind of paper. Mara emailed the HOA address printed on the notice, politely asking what modification they meant. An hour later, an answer arrived from someone named Kent Sutter, the property manager. It said, "Your Ring camera is not approved." Mara stared at her screen, then at the black doorbell camera she had installed after a stranger tried her doorknob at midnight 2 weeks earlier. She had not called the police then, only watched through the peephole until the footsteps left. Her hands had been shaking for an hour afterward, and she had ordered the camera the next morning. The camera was the size of a matchbox and the same color as her door frame. It felt absurd that it could be considered a threat to neighborhood harmony. She wrote back that she would happily submit an architectural request and asked for the form. Kent replied, "Form is on portal. Fines continue until removed. Board will consider request at next meeting." The next meeting was 6 weeks away. 6 weeks of $100 a day was more money than Mara had in her checking account. She logged into the HOA portal, found the form, and discovered it required a printed photo of the modification, paint samples if relevant, a contractor license number if installation involved wiring, and a $75 review fee. There was also a note in bold: "Requests submitted do not halt fines." Mara laughed once, a short sound that startled her cat. Then she cried, quiet and angry, because it was the kind of rule that could only exist if someone had forgotten that real people lived under it. She removed the camera that night, feeling like she was unbolting her own sense of safety. The next day, another notice appeared: violation, missing approved doorbell fixture. Fine $1 per day until cured. Her original doorbell, the one that had come with the townhouse, had been replaced by the camera, and the wiring plate behind it was not the same shape as the old button. Now, by removing the camera, she had revealed a blank plate that the HOA claimed was also a violation. Mara emailed Kent again, attaching photos. His reply came 5 minutes later, as if he had been waiting with his finger hovering over send. Exterior must match community standards. Install approved doorbell immediately. Mara asked which doorbell was approved. Kent answered, "Board has not approved any changes. Return to original configuration." Mara wrote, "I cannot. The original was thrown away when the camera was installed. I did not know this required approval." Kent replied, "Ignorance of covenants is not a defense. Fines continue." That was when the injustice stopped being a nuisance and became something colder. It was not just a rule, it was a trap, and it did not care whether the trap had teeth in your life. Mara drove to a hardware store after work and bought the plainest doorbell button she could find. She installed it herself in the fading light, balancing on a step stool with a screwdriver and a sore wrist. 2 days later, the HOA posted another notice: violation, unapproved doorbell button. Fine $100 per day until cured. Mara felt something in her chest fold inward, like a paper crane crushed in a fist. It was not the money, not yet. It was the fact that nothing she did could be right, because the point was not compliance. The point was control. She went to the next HOA meeting, the one held in the clubhouse that smelled of lemon cleaner and old carpet. The board sat behind folding tables like a jury that had already decided. Kent stood at the side with a laptop, a small smile pinned to his face. Mara waded through complaints about dog waste and a debate about whether holiday wreaths were allowed after January 10th. When her name was finally called, she walked up with printed photos and a folder of emails. She explained the attempted break-in, the reason she installed the camera, and the impossible loop of fines. A board member with a tight bun interrupted her. "We cannot make exceptions based on feelings," she said, as if safety were a mood. Another board member, a man with a golf tan, asked why Mara did not simply put everything back the way it was. Mara told them she had tried, and she had asked for guidance, and she had been fined for every step. Kent clicked his tongue softly, like a teacher hearing an excuse. "The covenants are clear," he said, and he pulled up a slide of the violation sections on the projector. Mara realized he had prepared for her like she was a problem to be managed, not a neighbor to be helped. The board voted to uphold the fines. They offered her a compromise: remove all non-standard fixtures, pay the accrued fines, and resubmit any request for future modifications. The accrued fines were now $1,900. Mara drove home in the dark with her hands clenched on the steering wheel, thinking about how easily money could be demanded, how quickly debt could be manufactured. If you have ever felt that helpless anger, the kind that makes you rehearse arguments to an empty room, you know what was happening inside her. She sat at her kitchen table and opened her laptop, not to pay, but to read. She read the covenants carefully for the first time, line by line, as if they were a hostile contract, because that was what they had become. She found the section on fines, and her eyes snagged on one sentence that Kent had never quoted. It said that fines required notice and an opportunity to cure, and that the board must provide a written description of the approved standard for the item in violation. Another section said the board could not levy daily fines without a schedule adopted in an open meeting and distributed to homeowners. Mara searched the portal for the fine schedule and found nothing. She requested it in writing. Kent replied, "Schedule is internal." Mara read the state statute on homeowner associations next, the one her county library had linked on its website. It said fine schedules were not internal. It said records related to enforcement were subject to inspection. It said homeowners had the right to request alternative dispute resolution before collection actions. Mara felt her fear shift shape, becoming something sharper and more usable. The next day, she filed a certified letter requesting the fine schedule, the minutes approving it, and all enforcement records related to her unit. She also requested a hearing specifically on whether the fines were valid under the covenants and state law. She kept copies of everything, because she had learned that memory could be dismissed, but paper could not. A week passed with no reply. Then a letter arrived from the HOA attorney, a firm whose letterhead looked like money. It demanded payment within 10 days and warned of a lien. Mara read it, and her mouth tasted metallic. She could lose the townhouse over a doorbell. For one night, she almost gave in. She opened her banking app, stared at the number, and imagined the relief of making it stop. Then she imagined Kent learning that this tactic worked and using it again on someone older, someone poorer, someone too tired to fight. She closed the app and called a local legal aid clinic. They could not take her case, but a volunteer attorney named Rafiq Holt spent 20 minutes on the phone explaining small claims limits, record requests, and the state agency that handled HOA complaints. He told her to document every notice, take photos of every doorbell in the community, and never speak to the property manager without writing. Mara walked Briar Glen that weekend like a quiet investigator. She took pictures of at least 12 doorbell cameras, some much larger than hers. 2 units had ornate brass buttons shaped like flowers. One had a smart keypad lock with a glowing screen. None of them had orange violation notices. She printed the photos and laid them across her living room floor like a mosaic of hypocrisy. Her first setback came quickly. When she submitted another certified request, the post office tracking showed it delivered, but the HOA claimed they never received it. Mara felt the old helplessness rise, the sense of being trapped in someone else's story. So she changed tactics. She began emailing in addition to certified mail, attaching scanned copies, and she copied the entire board on every message. She wrote like she was building a case, because she was. Her second setback was social, and it hurt more. A neighbor she had waved to for months stopped her by the mailbox and said softly, "You should just pay it. You do not want to be on their bad side." Mara realized the HOA did not just enforce rules, it trained obedience. It made people afraid to be seen standing next to you. That night, she wrote a calm letter to the board, listing the statutes and covenant sections they were violating, and she attached the photos of other units with similar devices. She asked for the fines to be rescinded and for a written standard of approved doorbells. Kent responded with a single sentence, "Other violations are not relevant to yours." Mara could have screamed. Instead, she did something that felt terrifying and grown-up and irreversible. She filed a complaint with the state office that regulated community associations, attaching the covenant excerpts, the fine notices, and the HOA attorney demand letter. She also filed a request for mediation, as allowed under state law, and notified the HOA in writing that she disputed the debt. 2 days later, the HOA recorded a lien anyway. Mara found out because her credit monitoring app sent an alert. She sat on her couch and stared at the wall, feeling as if the air had been knocked out of the room. If you have ever watched a number on a screen threaten your future, you know how physical it can feel. Mara did not sleep that night. At 3 a.m., she got up, made coffee, and started drafting a small claims lawsuit for wrongful fines and improper lien filing. She asked for damages, filing fees, and statutory penalties for denial of records. She did not ask for revenge yet. She asked for relief. When she served the HOA, Kent called her for the first time. His voice was suddenly warm, like a salesman who had discovered a new tone. "Mara, this is getting out of hand," he said. "We can work something out if you just stop escalating." Mara listened, and in the pause before she answered, she heard what he was really saying. "Stop making this visible. Stop forcing us to follow our own rules." She told him she would communicate only in writing and hung up with her hands shaking, because courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing what matters more than fear. The mediation session was scheduled in a municipal building downtown, in a room that felt too bright and too neutral for how much was at stake. The mediator was a retired judge with a kind face and a voice like a metronome. Kent arrived with the HOA attorney and a binder. Mara arrived with her folder, her photos, and a notebook full of dates. At first, the HOA attorney spoke as if Mara were an irrational person who had refused to follow simple rules. He said the board had discretion, that standards existed, that fines were appropriate to maintain uniformity. The mediator asked to see the fine schedule and the written doorbell standard. Kent flipped through his binder, slow enough to be insulting. The attorney cleared his throat. "Those documents are not available today," he said. Mara slid her printed covenant excerpt across the table. She pointed to the sentence requiring the written standard. Then she showed the state statute requiring records access. Then she showed the photos of other units with doorbell cameras and smart locks. The mediator's eyebrows lifted, just slightly, and that tiny movement felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Kent tried to argue that enforcement was complaint-driven and that perhaps no one had complained about those units. Mara asked quietly why someone had complained about hers. The room went still. Kent did not answer. The mediator asked whether the HOA had investigated the attempted break-in or offered any security guidance. The attorney said security was not the HOA's responsibility. Mara looked at the mediator and said calmly, "Then uniformity is not a safety issue. It is aesthetics, and they used it to punish me for trying to feel safe." The mediator suggested the HOA remove the lien immediately and pause all fines pending proper documentation. The attorney asked for a private caucus. Mara sat alone for 10 minutes, staring at her hands and thinking about how strange it was that her peace depended on whether strangers in a boardroom respected words on paper. When they returned, the attorney offered to reduce the fines by half if Mara paid within 30 days and signed a non-disclosure agreement for a doorbell. Mara realized then that the board was not confident, it was afraid. She asked for the lien to be removed, all fines rescinded, and her filing fees reimbursed. She also asked for a written policy allowing small security devices and a published fine schedule as required by law. The attorney's expression hardened. "That is not happening," he said. Mara nodded as if she had expected it, and she said, "Then we will see each other in court." In the weeks before the hearing, the state agency responded to her complaint. They opened an investigation into the HOA's record-keeping and enforcement procedures. They requested documents the HOA had refused to provide her, and suddenly, like magic, the HOA produced them. The fine schedule existed, but it had never been adopted in an open meeting, and it was dated only 3 months earlier. Mara's first fines predated it. The written doorbell standard was a single sentence: "Doorbells must be harmonious." It had no model number, no description, no photo, nothing a person could follow. Mara included this in her court packet, along with the timeline showing the HOA fined her for removing the camera and fined her for installing a replacement. She included the lien recording date, which occurred after her mediation request and dispute notice, contrary to the statute. The HOA tried one more tactic. They scheduled a special board meeting and sent a community-wide email blaming increasing legal costs on a homeowner who was refusing to comply. Mara's name was not included, but the message was pointed enough that her phone started receiving cold, careful texts from neighbors. "Are you suing the HOA? My dues are going up because of this." Mara felt the pressure clamp down on her chest. She wanted to disappear. Instead, she printed a one-page factual summary with dates, statutes, and copies of her requests for records. She did not rant. She did not insult. She simply told the truth and slipped it into mailboxes of the neighbors who had cameras on their doors. By Friday, 3 people had emailed her privately, saying they had been fined for nonsense too, and they were afraid to fight. One older man wrote, "They put a lien on me for a fence picket. I paid because I thought I would lose my home." Mara asked if he would be willing to write a statement. He said yes, if his name could be kept out of public postings. At the courthouse, Mara sat on a hard bench outside the small claims courtroom and watched people clutch folders like life preservers. The HOA attorney arrived again, this time with a different board member, the woman with the tight bun. Kent was not there. Mara wondered if he had been instructed to stay away from a witness stand. When the judge called the case, the courtroom felt suddenly intimate, like a kitchen table where someone was about to make an important decision. The HOA attorney argued procedure, discretion, community standards, the need to deter violations. Mara spoke next, and her voice wavered at first. Then she found the rhythm of her timeline, the clean spine of facts. She described the notices, the contradictory demands, the refusal to provide standards, the unadopted fine schedule, and the lien filed despite her dispute and mediation request. She handed the judge copies of the covenant sections and the statute with the relevant lines highlighted. The judge asked the HOA attorney to produce the adopted fine schedule minutes. The attorney said they were not in the packet. The judge asked for the written standard that a homeowner could follow to avoid fines. The attorney pointed to the word harmonious. The judge looked up and said flatly, "That is not a standard. That is an opinion." Mara felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them back because she wanted to hear every word. The judge asked why other similar devices had not been fined. The board member said enforcement was complaint-driven. The judge asked who complained about Mara. The board member said that information was confidential. The judge paused, then said, "So a homeowner can be fined $100 per day based on a secret complaint under a secret schedule for violating a standard no one can define." The silence after that sentence was heavy and satisfying. The judge ruled the fines unenforceable, ordered the lien released within 72 hours, and awarded Mara her filing fees and statutory penalties for denial of records. Then the judge did something Mara had not dared to hope for. He referred the HOA to the state agency for further enforcement and suggested the association seek counsel on compliance before continuing any fine program. Outside the courtroom, the HOA attorney offered to settle the rest privately if Mara agreed not to discuss the case. Mara said no. She did not raise her voice. She simply said she wanted the policy fixed so the next person would not have to gamble their home on a doorbell. 2 weeks later, the lien release was recorded, and Mara watched the county website update like a storm cloud dissolving. The state agency issued a formal finding against the HOA for improper records practices and unlawful fine procedures. They required the board to adopt a clear fine schedule in an open meeting, create objective written standards for common enforcement items, and offer proper cure periods before daily fines could begin. They also required annual training for board members on state HOA law. The HOA's insurance carrier, spooked by the findings, pushed for reform to reduce future claims. At the next open meeting, the clubhouse was full in a way Mara had never seen. Neighbors who had always stayed quiet sat with arms crossed and eyes alert. One by one, they spoke about the way fear had settled into the community like dust, invisible until someone wiped a finger through it. The tight-bun board member resigned before the vote. Kent's property management contract was terminated the following month, and the new manager introduced an online application process that paused enforcement while requests were reviewed. The board adopted a security device policy that allowed doorbell cameras and basic safety lighting with clear size and placement rules. Mara installed her camera again, this time with the board's written approval printed and filed in her folder. The victory was not flashy, but it was real. Her monetary award was enough to cover the costs she had been threatened with, and then some. And the reform was enough to make Briar Glen feel like a neighborhood again, instead of a trap. If you have ever been told to accept something unfair because fighting is inconvenient, remember Mara sitting at her kitchen table at 3 a.m., choosing paper over panic. Remember that rules are not morality, and confidence is not correctness. Sometimes the most ordinary person in the room is the one who forces the powerful to read their own words out loud. And sometimes that is how a doorbell becomes a line in the sand.